There is a lot on the line in this presidential election. One of the biggest things at stake is the possibility of finally doing something about the climate crisis. And one of the best plans that's been put forward to deal with it is the Green New Deal. And that is why I could not be more thrilled to invite onto the show our next guest, one of the architects of the Green New Deal and the Vice President for Data for Progress, Julian Brave Noisecat. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me.
Very glad to have you here. There's a lot that I want to learn about, but I want to start with the process of putting together the Green New Deal. What were the origins? How did it evolve over time?
The Green New Deal really came out of two conversations. The first was this conversation about how we were going to get a popular and really a populist climate policy across the finish line. So backtrack to 2018. This is before the climate strikes. This is before the election of AOC. Climate is generally considered like a tertiary issue for Democrats. And we were all, as climate advocates and wonks, concerned about how we were going to get this issue to the top of the agenda. And back then, the leading thinking was through something called a federal job guarantee, the notion that the government would become an employer of last resort for people in the economy. And so we started this conversation about a job guarantee. At the same time, this is before the Democratic midterms in 2018. And there was a bunch of candidates, including Ocasio-Cortez, who were running on this thing called a Green New Deal. And those two things sort of combined, this conversation about jobs and the climate crisis. And by November, we kind of coalesced on calling this sort of package that we were developing the Green New Deal.
I'm curious on your read on, as you point out, it was at that point like a tertiary issue at best, and now it's one of the most high-profile issues, not necessarily on the debate stage to my endless frustration, but for people thinking about what needs to happen in this election. And I'm curious, like it felt like the protest outside of Nancy Pelosi's office was the turning point on that. Do you think that might be the case? Do you think that it was putting a name and a label on this program, that it needed that sort of identifiable brand almost? What do you think we could attribute the rise in importance and talk around this issue to?
I think that those are definitely two very important parts of it. The naming a solution that was appealing to people and that had brand name recognition, the Green New Deal, that was important. The sit-in in Speaker Pelosi's office, also important. I think from a broader perspective, though, you have to remember that I think the climate crisis is becoming actually much more visceral and felt by people. This used to be something that we thought of as something that was far off in the future. But then we saw a city that was called Paradise literally turned into hell on earth inside of 30 minutes. We saw thousands of people in Puerto Rico die. There are increasing wildfires across the West Coast and across the country, flooding, hurricanes, all sorts of natural disasters. And I think that people are seeing these things coming closer and closer to impacting themselves and their lives, or have been touched by these disasters. And I think that is making this threat of climate change feel so much more imminent. At the same time, I think that the rising activism of this, so the climate strikes, the Sunrise Movement, really the youth-led push to do something about climate change, which has finally broken through, has sort of made people sort of wake up to this crisis. And then lastly, I think that there have been some moments of really important research and reports and synthesis of the latest science that have come out. In particular, the United Nations report on warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is the document that led to people talking about that we have 12 years thing. Mm-hmm. I think some of your listeners and viewers might have remembered that we have 12 years thing. That report in of itself seems to have created a moment that lurched a lot of the key sort of communicators on this, whether that be scientists or experts or politicians, to really start ringing the alarm bells because it is an alarming situation now. And I think those things combined have sort of brought climate into this new moment of importance.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.